Hello and welcome to Lancashire Branch's Garden Moth Morning. This is the session from Saturday the 5th of September. This morning we have 3 sessions. Justine has been up to our butterfly reserve at Myers Allotment and we'll show you some moths from there. Brian Hancock has got some interesting and useful spreadsheet information, and I will show you a few interesting recent sightings from VC59.
This presentation was put together very last minute, in fact yesterday. The weather over the past couple of weeks has been unfavourable for moth recording, and so trying to get the right balance has been quite difficult. But I did finally catch some moths, and I'll just give a little bit of background to the site, and then I'll go through some of the interesting species that I found. So, Myers Allotment. So, Myers is situated in the Arnside and Silverdale area of outstanding natural beauty, and I've just got the map there just to show where we sit. So we're in good company. We've got Gate Barrows to the north. We overlook Leighton Moss, and there are many other lovely little reserves nearby. And then there's the satellite map on the left, and that just shows the composition of the reserve in terms of woodland and open areas, and you can get an idea of what the habitat is like. So these are some recent photographs. This is when I was going to check the trap the other day, and as you can see, this is one of the open rides. Lots of bracken, lots of nice birch, willows, a really nice mix of trees, grasslands. The site itself is only, I think it's 7 hectares, so it's not very big. So there's a lot going on in quite a small area. There's a little bit of exposed limestone pavement. It's quite inclined. But yeah, it's species richness is up there. And that's a view down onto Leighton Moss from the area that I trapped. And I'll just talk a little bit as to why I chose to trap there. So at the beginning of the week, I tried to catch a few moths to make a presentation, and when I turned up in the morning, the 3 redpoll cattle that are on there had decided they wanted to go and investigate my traps and knock them over, which left me with 3 moths, which wasn't really enough to be making a presentation out of. And I think they were large yellow underwing, lesser yellow underwing, and small square spot, which I don't think many people would have been pleased with. So Thursday night, I went with the the heavier equipment, and I went onto the inclined limestone pavement and took the generator and the Robinson. And this allowed me to draw moths in from a wider area, and the trap was safe, the generator was safe from being investigated by the nosy cows. And I had some good success. So in total, I think I had 28 species, which isn't bad in comparison to what we've had over the past few weeks. And what was quite nice is the catch sort of reflected the time of year and the habitat that we're in and our surroundings. So the first moth that we've got is square spot rustic. It looks quite large actually. And it's characterised by the very pale square kidney mark, which is quite uniform. It's a very common species throughout. It likes woodland edge, rough ground, feeds on, well, the larvae feed on many grass species and low growing plants, and they can be found during August and September, and come to light quite readily. They can be quite numerous on occasions. and they've probably been out for the past few weeks, but the numbers are increasing. So this is quite a nice one. So this is Dusky Thorne, and for me, it's one of the commonest thorn species in the area, although it does state that it's local. So they fly from around here, probably late July to October, and their larval food plant is privet and ash, which we have in abundance around here. Over the past few years, the numbers have declined, but all of a sudden they just exploded again. And I have read that they are a species that are prone to fluctuations, great fluctuations in numbers. The characteristics to identify this species are the dark shading on the edge of the forewing here. And I don't think there are any other thorn species that look like that. But their antennae are fantastic, really nice species. This was the first sallow that I've caught this year, and another very autumnal looking species. It's highly variable in the intensity of the markings. This is probably one of the paler forms that you can get. The majority are usually a lot darker. This wasn't actually in the trap. This was from around the trap, so it's worth having a good search. And I think they feed on sallow catkins, and then they move on to low-growing herbaceous plants, and they fly September, October, and they're quite readily attracted to light. They're also quite easy to find during the day. I don't know why. I think they just must stand out. I seem to find one or two a year at rest in the low vegetation when I'm out walking. So this is a really nice noctuid. This is Autumnal Rustic, and this is actually the first one that I've had this year. So this species really likes chalky, sandy soil, loves open heathland. Might pick one or two up in woodland, but it likes to fly just after dusk through the low-growing vegetation. And I don't think the photograph really does it justice. They generally, when fresh, have a really nice pink hue. They're not variable in their markings. They very much always look very similar. Maybe the size of the black markings, there's a little bit of variation there, but other than that, they don't really deviate from that. And they fly between August and October. The next one, I was really pleased to record this. This is only the second time that I've recorded it in Lancashire. So this is anomalous, and I don't know why it's so uncommon. I think it is one of the species that is rapidly declining. It's a sexually dimorphic species. The males are larger than the females. I don't think I've ever recorded a female, but they're a very slight species. They're quite small. They generally roll their wings up a little bit. So when they're resting, they go into a tight curl. Their larval food plant is wavy hairgrass and tufted hairgrass, so they like these open areas. And I think these grass species are finer grass species, and I think part of the problem with their decline may be the increase in the coarser grass species that we're seeing at the moment, in line with the wetter winters. That's quite a nice record for the AONB and Lancashire in general. Next one is common wainscot. It's not as common as the name suggests. Quite often confused with apparently southern wainscot and smoky wainscot. For me, it really stands out especially when it's in the hand. It's got quite a neat appearance to it, and you can see it's quite heavily streaked, and also it's got a nice neat hairdo, and it almost looks ombre, so it goes from dark and fades to light. And southern wainscot obviously has that characteristic grey headband. Personally, I don't think it can be confused, but you know, so that's really nice. Yeah, so the larvae feed on various grasses. It's actually a double brooded species, so you'll find it sort of in July and then again in September. The last time I saw this was near Silverdale moss. Maybe some association with the reed beds there and the grassy areas surrounding, possibly. That's a nice record. Next one, I've not actually seen one this year, so this is the first pinion streak snout that I found this year. It's quite easily mistaken for micromoth. A lot of beginners would think that possibly it was pyrrhid. The forewing length is only about 10 millimeters long, so you know you could quite easily spend ages looking through the micro book to no avail, but it's actually in the noctuids, and for me it's associated with really damp habitats, so you'd find it a lot around Leighton moths and such. I don't think my allotment is that wet, so maybe it's travelled a little bit. And it has quite an extended flight period from about June to roughly the end of August. So this is getting a little bit late for it. The larval food plants are unknown, but I think they'll accept many different low-growing plants in captivity. And the last one is, I hate pronouncing these, Hypsophila or Stella. So this is a highly variable micro. There are so many different forms, and I think this one, it gets mistaken for parenthicella and such. But you know, sorry, it's not a very good photograph, but you know, the antennae are quite nice, pointed forward. And they're a nice group of moths. So these, the larvae feed on oak, and they will overwinter, so they'll emerge around now, they'll hibernate, and then probably one of the first moths to reappear in spring, when you've probably seen very few other micromoths. Yeah, it's really common, and I think that may be it. Yeah.
Okay.
So we were saved at the last minute.
Thank you, Justine. And now over to Brian.
Right, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some garden moths I've had recently. But first of all, I'll just say just a little word about a simple way in which I keep my records of garden moths. I should say at the start that I do put all my data on MapMate to go to the county recorder, and I get all the data back so I can look at the whole county, which is a fantastic resource. But this is a personal thing I've evolved. So I'll just go and zoom in a little bit and you can see what it is. It's basically, it's to record the first date that I see a species. So the second column, I've got the name of the moth in alphabetical order. And if I get a new one, I can easily insert a new name. The status is whether it's an immigrant or so on. The main month, that's the predominant month that I see it. Number of broods, some are 2 broods, some hibernate. And then the frequency, if I see it, say 75% of years, I call it irregular. The rest are occasional, and there are a few that are just once only. And then along the top, I've got all the years. the start, I didn't, I just made a note that I'd seen it. But then from about 2003 onward, I started saying, writing down the first date. I saw it in my garden, and I in bold the earliest date on record, so I can see at a glance what my earliest dates are for any particular species. It's just a bit of fun, this really. And now, if I put some filters on, I can look at, let's look at August. Unselect everything, select August. Okay, and let's look at frequency. Let's look at the regular ones. Unselect the regular ones there. And I'll just go out a little bit. And there are my regular ones for August. And then I'd be curious about which ones of those have I not seen this August? And if I go along to this year, and then click on, you can see some gaps there. And just fill in the blanks. And I'll just run back, see what one of those four I've not seen. Broad-bordered yellow underwing, canary-shouldered thorn, surprise, surprise, not seen that. Frosted orange, and square spot rustic, which is normally a very common moth. So you can have a bit of fun just looking at your results as the year goes by. And at the end of the year, I total up the number I've seen, and then I can pull up a little graph like that. And you can see, obviously, the first few years I wasn't in residence all the time up here, and then I got going properly. 2006 was a really good year. That was a migrant year, only bettered by 2013. And this last year was about 185, and I am up to about 180 now, with still a possible 20 regulars to see. So it's probably going to be quite a good year. But if you'd asked me straight off, I'd say, oh, I don't know, not a very good year. I haven't seen many moths. I'm sure there's quite a lot of missing. But actually, it's going to turn out to be an average year. So that's just a bit of fun. I'll close that down now. And see if I can get back to the PowerPoint presentation. It should be, oh, the windows, hang on, oh, there it is. Right, now this is just a few slides. There we go. Well, the good news about the end of August is it's goodbye to all these yellow underwings. They are an absolute pest in my garden, and for most years, I switched the trap off for almost a week in the peak of this season, because there's 480, just a fairly typical large catch. And the trouble is, you can see all the way around the rim of the thing, all the scales come off, they fly around, bash all the smaller moths. Lucky to see any moth in decent condition other than these, and they're all pretty battered. So that's goodbye to the yellow underwings. We've talked about Dusky Thorne, but I'll just show you because, can you see the graph there? Can you see the graph? Okay. Yes. Where you see it didn't occur at all, then suddenly, let me just get rid of all those pictures, that's better. And you can see it suddenly appeared, and on 2018, there's a great peak, but it's crashed down again last year, and this year I've only seen one so far. It's an ash feeder, and of course, one first reaction is, gosh, could it be affected by ash dieback? Well, we've heard there are natural fluctuations, so let's hope it's just that. Just for beginners, there's 3 other thorns that look quite similar. Canary shoulder's got the really bright canary color. I should see that, but I haven't yet. August thorn doesn't occur up here. It's in the southern Lancashire. September thorn, I very occasionally see it. The main difference is the September thorn has got a very gentle curve to the 2 cross lines, whereas the August thorn is quite an acute bend as you approach the leading edge. Well, we've almost finished the footman, but this is another one from my garden records. These are all garden records. It's gone up enormously, and this year will be right off the scale. It's very distinctive with its shape like a melon seed. There's the buff footman. There is one catches that there is a pale form of the dingy footman, similar in colour to that, but actually it's a shape that's so distinctive. And those are the three common footmen that we see, mostly July and August. That's interesting. A new one for the AONB. Pete Stevens had this, and what you see right away is the wings are tightly wrapped around the lower part of the body, and that's the distinctive feature of the scarce footman. And the little collar here is virtually complete. So that's you had one, Justin, I think. And
I was just about to type that.
yeah,
I recorded one last year.
and so you and Peter are the only people who've recorded it in our AONB. That's nice. Here's another one. Strange, isn't it? Why does it suddenly become so common? It just used to jog along at, half a dozen each year, and suddenly leaping up. And this year I've seen plenty too. It feeds on a variety of low-growing herbaceous plants. There's nothing special about the food plant, and it's just generally distributed throughout the country. So I can't think of any explanations why it's gone up so much in my garden. The Cetaceous means a bristle or bristly, and I'm not sure what it's referring to. Possibly this little collar here that sort of looks rather bristly. Some people say it's these marks here that remind them of bristles. I'll just tell you a little story. This is a very famous entomologist called Baron Charles de Worms, and he was a moth recorder in Greater London when I started my mothing in the late 50s. And he was a delightful character. He was Jewish, and he had a bristly moustache. So he was affectionately called the Cetaceous Hebrew character by the people who knew him. I went on several field outings with him. He was a really kind chap, most helpful to beginners. He was at university with my father, so I met him socially too. But he was one of the great entomologists of the middle of the last century. It was a pleasure to meet him. But another story, his first name is Charles. And the older ones of you might remember, have you ever heard of the term Charlesing a moth? Well, as he got older, and this applies to me too, I from time to time trap the moth in the pot, in the rim of the pot, and damage it as you're getting out of a net. And he did this an awful lot. And so if you ever damage a moth when you're getting it out, it's called Charlesing a moth. All the older entomologists know that. Nice story. In my garden, go back. Oh yeah, no. I've got a big juniper bush in my garden. I've never trimmed it, perhaps I should have done, but it attracts two nice species. First is the Juniper Pug, and that's fascinating. Why has that gone? It's got record numbers this year. It often occurred to me, it lays its eggs on the probably the tips of the tree. If I'd gone clipping it every autumn, I probably would have snipped all the eggs off. So possibly I'm seeing those increased numbers because I've let the thing just grow and get this quite out of hand. It's easy to identify with these when the dark markings are here, but there are some where the dark markings are really very mild and hardly noticeable. That could puzzle people. But if you catch it near juniper, and in August, it's a juniper pug. One thing to look at, see these lovely fringes. If you're trying to decide whether a moth is in good condition or not, have a look at the fringes, because they're the things that wear, and they tell you that it's been out. They're a little bit worn there compared with the two. So if you don't struggle with very worn pugs, it's impossible really. But have a good look at the fringes and see what your condition it is. There's another moth, Juniper carpet. Now this is strange because it was very frequent when I first 10 years in my garden, and it's virtually died away. And I haven't seen it for the last 2 years. I find this by just it comes out in October, and go with a torch and shine it on the bush and hunt the bush, and you find it resting on the bush. It does come to light a bit, it even comes to lighted windows, but by far the easiest way to find it is by searching the bush. And every October, I search night after night and saying it's disappeared. Now, I've no idea why. But if you have a juniper bush, it's well worth searching by torchlight at night. I'll just allow myself one moth that's outside the garden, one of our rarest pugs. This is goldenrod, a plant worth learning to recognize as the food plant of several species. And I found a single caterpillar at the back of the barn, gate barrows, kept it, turned into a pupa and hatched out beautifully for me. And I've let it go in gate barrows. Again, you see the perfect fringes there, absolutely pristine specimen. Lovely side. Probably Lancashire's rarest moth, or rarest pug. Grey Kai, named after the Greek alphabet signal Chi. It's a very distinctive moth. That often rests on walls, and when the weather's poor or it's going to rain or get windy, I put my Robinson trap close to the garage wall. And this is just to remind you, it's always worth looking around your trap, either late at night or certainly first thing in the morning, because quite a few moths will be settling outside. And this one was on the wall on the garage, just next to the garage. I have occasionally just come across them by chance on a wall. Very nice little moth, I love that one. Feathered Gothic has been a regular one in my garden trap over the last week. Not to be mistaken with the Gothic, which also comes to the garden. This one occurs in July, and this was an August one, August and September. Very distinctive, nice, pretty thing. The larvae feed on grasses, and I read that it doesn't lay the eggs on the grass. It actually flies around and drops eggs as it's flying around. Now, how anybody knows that, I can't imagine, but that seems to be the case. And there's a butterfly, isn't it, the marbled white, that does the same. Justin's talked about this one. It's a lovely moth. I haven't seen it. You should see it every year, but I haven't seen it yet. For me, it's usually a September one, but it's a pretty little thing, one to look out for. This one was in my trap yesterday. A distinguished looking moth, Autumnal Rustic. The main feature is this little black bar that you see in the middle of the wing. But the thing is, just move the forewing away, and if you can see the white underwing, that really clinches the diagnosis or the ID. That's a regular thing. It feeds on the larvae feed on the roots of grasses and so on. So I had a very poor patch the last few nights, last fortnight actually. But if you're getting the same, don't be disheartened. This is a collection of moths I made over 24 hours from the trap at Leighton Moss and my home trap. And I think I've got over 20 species there. I won't go through them all. Well, treble bar, that's redline quaker, silver wye, large yellow underwing, Cetaceous Hebrew character, brimstone, green pintle present, right, common wainscot. As Justin said, that's one that comes in September, not very common. I think probably a spruce carpet, marble beauty, copper underwing, dark swordgrass, pink barred sallow, green carpet, frosted orange, feathered ranunculus, another orange underwing, lovely pink barred sallow, I think that's a canary shouldered thorn, and that's snout, rosy rustic, quite a lot. So that should encourage you to keep going through the year. Just highlighting a couple of my favorite ones in September. You're going to see in the next shortly, I hope. Orange sallow is not so common, but it's a beauty. And so is the frosted orange. They remind me of the autumn colors that you get in the leaves of the trees and the bushes change. Mouse moss we talked about last time. Those three little dots are very distinctive. And the black rustic's a lovely one too. That should be coming out soon. So, I've tried sugaring for the last 10 days, and I've been incredibly disappointed. All I've had is copper underwing and a large yellow underwing. I'm still living in hope for that. This is one of the most lovely iconic butterflies of autumn. It's only been to my light trap about, I think 5 times in 20 years. And this was actually from 2 years ago. And it's most unusual to see one that's in good condition, because often they flutter around inside the trap and bash the scales quite a bit, but that's a beauty. So don't be discouraged if you haven't seen one yet. They are there. They tend to come to sugar more than light, so keep trying. So that's my lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. So there's a question. I'll answer these. Is it helpful to move the trap around the garden, even if it is a small garden, but with a variety of shrubs and flowers? If it's a small garden, it probably doesn't matter if you leave the trap in the same place. If you've got a larger garden, it may be worthwhile moving the trap around, depending on the weather and the time of year. You may want to use a particular wall or shrub as a windbreak. That's quite useful. But I mean, my traps stay in the same place all year round in the garden. I don't really have much choice, so it really doesn't matter.
I often run two traps in the garden, one at the top end and one at the front. Heath at the front and Robinson at the back. It's interesting. I get a lot of moths that are just in one trap and not in the other. It certainly does improve the species catch.
I do the same. I have one at the front and one at the back, and it's just like a totally different catch. You know, well, different habitats altogether, I suppose.
I kept some records, and it was only about a third were common to both traps.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. And it sounds about right, actually. So, shall we move on to Jane?
Thank you, and now over to Jane. So I haven't got a great deal to show you, and a couple of my moths have already been talked about.
Sorry.
Brian's already had both of these, obviously common sort of August, September moths. So yeah, so that's my flounced rustic. I've had a couple of these in the last week. Again, I've no live moths because my trappings over the last week have been dreadful. And so these were from last weekend when one of the nights was much milder and still. So obviously Brian's already talked about this. Sorry about this. Put that outside the door. Hopefully somebody will get that downstairs. Yeah, so flounced rustic, single brooder to end of July through to the end till late September. And as Brian says, the distinguishing thing are the black marks and also the very white underwing, which distinguishes it from some of the other rustics that you might mistake it for. Another one, which Brian's already talked about, which I love, is feathered Gothic. Now, interestingly, we got this last Friday during some light to sheet at Freshfield Nature Trust, National Trust, over the National Moth Nights. I went down with Andrew to Freshfield, where there was Richard Walker and Trevor Davenport, John Girdley, Mary Dean and Rod. And again, it was one of these, we were just about packing up and I saw this and sort of came running back from our little trapping spot to the others, and was really thrilled with this. And apparently it's a really good record for that site. Meanwhile, I'd had my trap on in the garden at home, and the trap was pretty much empty apart from this specimen here. And that was my first garden record for it. I've only ever seen it otherwise a couple of years ago when we went down to the local churchyard, and I just took a very simple UV LED sort of sheet and light while Andrew was going around with his bat detector. So very pleased with that one. and there's not a lot more to say over and above what Brian's already said, but interesting little moth. Now, moving on from my garden, as I said, last weekend we were at Freshfields and Mary Dean and Rod were there, and Mary does the NMRS garden moth trapping on a Friday night. And so she'd emailed in the morning with this record of black arches. And this is a relatively recent species arrival in the county, with the first record back in 2005 at Martin Mere. And since then, there have only been 10 further records up to the end of 2019 across Lancashire. The moth reached Leighton Moss in 2016. So it doesn't seem to be establishing itself regularly in any one location as yet, and is really quite a rare species in Lancashire, but what a pretty moth that is. It is widespread and fairly common across southern England, north to the Midlands, and in the south and mid Wales, but it is moving northwards. So a good one to look out for. Single brooded, so you might see it anywhere from mid-July through to the end of August, so we're probably right at the end of its flight period, although that one does look like a really fresh specimen, and it's mainly an oak feeder, but has been recorded occasionally on other trees. You're not likely to mistake that for anything else. And again, Mary found this on the wall outside, I think, her toilet window, and I think she had to precariously lean out to try and get it potted. So that was one of those, don't do this at home, don't try this at home. But I thought I'd show it because obviously it was National Moth Nights and that was the target species. So the records are fairly few and far between. And again, as Brian says, you're most likely to see them come to sugar. I've been trying, but still no success, but I'll keep going. Now, the only other thing I'd like to talk about is I went to Freshfield National Trust again with Richard Walker and Trevor Davenport. Now this was on the 7th of August to do some sheet and light, and Richard and Trevor were set up in one spot and Andrew and I were in a field to the side, and we were sort of both going backwards and forwards between the traps, looking at what was coming to the light and sheet. And it got to just after midnight and we had a bit of a drive home, so we said, right, well, we're going to pack up now. So we were just having a final little look over the egg boxes, and what should I spot but Portland moth. So the one we got was this specimen on the right hand side. So absolutely thrilled, there was huge excitement, and because it wasn't seen last year at all. There weren't any records. The picture on the left is from Richard, and there's certainly in previous years has been a greater abundance, but it's getting very, very scarce now. It's a coastal sand dune specialist, now only found along the Sefton coast in Lancashire. Has been seen elsewhere on rare occasions, including at Gate Barrows in 1999, and in St Anne's in 2005. And we actually, there was a light trapping event last August, I think, I'm sure it was last year, on Fylde Sand Dunes Nature Reserve, and Richard was obviously specifically targeting this, but we didn't get any at all. But it was a very breezy night. It is recorded almost annually in the Formby and Ainsdale Dunes area. It hasn't been seen in double figures since 2013, but it is the best place in England to see this really rare moth, which is sadly declining. And Richard has in previous years been looking for the larvae which feed at night on dwarf sallow in the area, and that is very abundant around Formby Point, but haven't found any. And apparently when they're there, they're very easy to spot because as they climb up the plant, they leave like a silky thread, and that's very easy to see in torchlight. And then towards the end of the night, the larvae retreat back down the thread to their little sandy burrow or scrape where they rest during the day. But Richard and some of the others have tried looking for this over the previous few years, and are just not finding the larvae at all. So to trap or to have one of these land to the light and sheet was a great thrill. So this is just to show you, so this is a copy from the recent Moth Atlas. So you can see the yellow dots were the pre-1970 records where they were really quite high. And then the lighter blue, obviously up to 99, and the numbers are definitely going down. And 2000 onwards, you can see the numbers are really, really declining. So obviously this St Anne's one was 2005, and then we've got Silverdale area, but it's not a good story, sadly, for this really. And it's a very pretty moth with the green and the red, very neat, neat little moth. And then this is just a highlighted, so a bigger map of the Lancashire records. But I mean, some of these go back a long, long way. And this obviously is an unusual record very far inland, so we don't quite know how that got there. But
what record is that? I know the record from Mary Dean in the Thanky Valley a few years ago. So maybe one of those dots.
I'm just looking it up.
That's if my memory serves me well.
Yeah, it's not Mary. It was 1992 in Horton. So method unknown, with a recorder whose name I don't recognise. Our next session will be on Saturday the 26th of September at 9:30 AM. Please do join us if you'd like to see some more moths. For further information, you can visit all of these sites, or you can follow us on Twitter, which is at BC_Lancs. Visit our branch page, and any questions, Justine would be more than happy to hear from you. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.